Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We're going to wait just a little bit while people hop on. Didn't mean to do that. There we are. If you're joining us today, say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. I shouldn't be in a chair that moves. Deborah's with us. Doc's with us. Hey,
Hi, Brianna.
Hey, Patrick. Shannon and Sue.
There we go.
Hey.
All right, guys. We have Dr. Tony with us today, and he is going to talk about fall processing and calving.
Make sure you get your questions in the comments there. At the end of the segment, we are going to be giving away a Valley Vet gift card to one lucky viewer. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Tony.
Well, hi, folks. Hope everybody's doing well today. As they said, we're going to talk today about fall processing. We'll touch on calves, mature animals, cows, bulls, and then we'll move into fall calving and some considerations, supplies to have on hand, and maybe some vaccine health conditions for those baby calves as they come. So with that, we'll get started. If you have questions, please type them into the box at any time. And I will sure try to address those as they come up. Hopefully everybody's doing well, and let me adjust the camera there. There we go. Hopefully you guys are all doing okay on rain and weather. I know here our beans sure could use a drink, so we've sure been praying for some rain. But with that, we'll get started. Fall processing, we'll go ahead and start with the weaning age calves. Hi, Melissa. And so that's a very valuable time to vaccinate these cattle and get some immunity started to build up in them. They're at risk for respiratory disease and also some clostridial diseases. So we really need to protect their immune system and help support that. The best time to vaccinate these cattle is actually prior to weaning, about 3 to 4 weeks. And that way those vaccines kick in and we have immunity already built up during that stressful time of weaning. So with that being said, I'll just kind of read off my recommended vaccine protocol for this age group. And what I'll do is I'll create some lists and I'll find a way to upload it in these comments. If we can get that figured out, I'm sure the marketing team can help me with that. But that way you guys can come back and reference what we talked about. And I'll even do the same with the supply list that we're going to talk about with calving. So for pre-weaning or weaning time, you want to give a modified live 5-way vaccine to these calves. Modified live 5-way would cover BVD, IBR, BRSV, and PI3. So those are going to be the big viruses that come in there and create respiratory disease in these calves. I prefer an injectable at this time frame. The reason for that, the big reason, is because our intranasal vaccines don't have BVD protection. So that's an important virus we need to protect against. Another vaccine that you need to focus on is a Pasteurella vaccine. Protects against Mannheimia hemolytica, Pasteurella multocida. These are very common bacteria that can invade those lungs and cause severe pneumonia and respiratory disease. So you can get these vaccines separately from your modified live injectables, or you can find a modified live injectable that has Pasteurella protection included. So many people prefer the convenience of having one shot to cover both. And then the last vaccine would be a 7 or 8 way blackleg, depending on the part of the country you live in. And your veterinarian would be able to provide some information on which product would be better for your location. And that's going to protect against all those clostridial diseases that these calves are at risk for. So those are the 3 big vaccines that really every operation can benefit from around weaning time. If you're banding bulls at this time, you do need to give a tetanus toxoid. And ideally, you'd give 2 rounds, with the second round being at the time of banding. Practically, for most operations, that's not possible. So many people only give 1 tetanus at the time of banding and tend to get along okay, but there is still some minor risk there. Implant would be important at this age group, especially if you're going to hold on to them and feed them for a period of time. And then deworming. And for this age group, I do prefer the oral drench because it seemed to have better efficacy against these parasites based on some recent studies. So the oral drenches would be, for example, Safeguard, Synanthic, Valbazin. Those would be 3 examples of that. And so those are pretty effective dewormers. Now we're going to take a little break and discuss the benefits of implanting and some proper implant techniques. First of all, the technique is to put it onto the back side of the ear in the middle third. And there are some diagrams that you can find online that help illustrate that for you if you're having trouble picturing that. But sanitation and cleanliness become very important when we're implanting calves to help minimize the risk of ear infection and ear abscesses. So there's some things to really think about. The number one being disinfecting that needle. And often the easiest way to do this is to have a sponge that's soaked in a disinfectant, and chlorhexidine is my choice. And so then you take that needle and rub it on both sides on that sponge to coat that in that disinfectant. Obviously, if it becomes visibly soiled, use a brush and get that blood, that feces off before you disinfect it. Now, on the back side of the ear, if you have contamination, we need to take care of that too, because we can carry that in with the implant needle. And so if it's solids, you can use the back side of a dulled knife or some kind of scraper to scrape that solids off, whether it's dried feces or mud or what it is, and then have a bucket with disinfectant and a brush, and you can scrub that disinfectant to clean the ear. So that becomes important, especially if we're using an implant that doesn't have an antibiotic included into it to decrease the risk of ear abscesses. And those ear abscesses, they actually prevent the implant from working. So you lose that investment and that potential weight gain. That leads us into the benefit of implants. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but implants can increase growth up to 20%, and they can increase feed efficiency by up to 10%. So we feed these calves less and they grow more. So that it can be a very valuable investment. The return on investment can be up to 10 to 1. So for every $1 you spend on an implant, you can get $10 back. So good for you, good for the cattle. It's really a good thing to do, especially in this age group and these calves. Obviously wouldn't be done in mature animals, breeding animals, because those hormones can affect their breeding and their hormone system. So it's really only done in calves 45 days of age and older. Okay. Any questions on pre-weaning or weaning vaccination protocols? We'll go ahead and move into the mature animals. We will start with bred cows. So we're talking about spring calving cows right now. Cows that would be set to calve, anytime in the late winter, early spring time frame. So they're going to be, January to May, June time frame. We want to vaccinate them with a killed product. And the reason for that being there's no risk there to the fetus. Modified live products run the risk of causing an abortion or reproductive loss in that bred cow. So 5-way killed virus, you want to include a lepto, 5-way lepto, and you want to make sure you include that HB component of lepto because that's the most common strain of lepto in the United States and the one that is more likely to infect cows and cause an abortion. Now, there are many people that just give a 5-way lepto if these cows were adequately vaccinated during their pre-breeding time frame. And so you can speak with your veterinarian about the application on which one you should choose. If there's any question, there'd be no harm in using a killed 5-way plus lepto. Okay. Now, spring calves are prone to scours, and so this would be a good time to administer a scour vaccination to your bred cows as well. And then deworming would be appropriate at this time frame as well. Again, I like the oral drenches. The white wormers is what they're called, because that's a good dewormer, very effective against these parasites. Pre-breeding cows, if you've got some fall bred cows that are calving and you're going to vaccinate them before you turn the bull in, this is when we can talk about using a modified live vaccine. A modified live 5-way, you want to make sure you get that into them 30 days pre-breeding because it can throw off a cycle and make them lose, one cycle where they can't get bred. If you're not able to do it 30 days prior to breeding, it might be safer just to stick with the killed product. Okay. Now, you want to include the 5-way lepto plus HB, and also prior to breeding, you want to include a Vibrio. And so many of the products have 5-way plus Vibrio plus lepto. And so it would be wise to pick a combination product with all of that. Okay, and then again, deworm. We'll come back on some more deworming thoughts here in a minute. Is Optimizer Calf Scour Gel a good product to use? That's a good question, Patrick. I'm not specifically familiar with that. A lot of these calf scour gels, they have some energy, they have some electrolytes, and so they help support the hydration of that calf and give them some energy. So I'll look into that, Patrick, and I'll come back after we're done here and comment some specifics on that for you. Okay, and then we'll touch on bulls. Bulls are pretty easy. We want to protect them against the diseases that they can infect the cows with and then cause reproductive loss. And so that would be a 5-way plus a Vibrio lepto HB. So a 5-way plus VL5 HB. Modified live or killed product would be appropriate for bulls, and then deworm them. So when we talk about worms, parasites in cattle, there's a whole range of parasites, and honestly, most of them are not economically significant. They don't affect the production of the animals. That being said, there is one, especially in cattle, that's very important to control, and that's Ostertagia, or the brown stomach worm. And this parasite can affect any age group of cattle, and it can cause some pretty bad effects. So the way this parasite works is they become infected with it. These larvae travel into the glands of the stomach, and then they go through a maturation process and they come back out. And that process where they come back out of the stomach can cause a lot of damage, and it can really cause some illness in these animals. Now, that's not even the worst part. The worst part is when these worms, they have a specific life cycle depending on the season of the year. So in Kansas, we're considered northern, even though we're not really north, but we have cold enough winters where these parasites infect the animal, and then they travel into the stomach and they stay there until next spring. And then next spring, huge numbers of these parasites then exit the lining of the stomach. And that can be devastating to these animals, especially if they're already kind of in a compromised position. So that's something that we need to consider and deworm appropriately for. Now in the South, that inhibited stage actually happens in the early summer. Those parasites try to avoid the hot summers. So they will inhibit, depending on the year, May, June, and then they'll come back out in the fall time. So speak with your veterinarian about when that happens in your area. You can find some maps online, but that is something to consider, because when those parasites are inhibited, that's when we need to focus on controlling those inhibited stages, and not every dewormer works against that. Okay, so the white dewormers are the best for those inhibited stages. Synanthic, Valbazin are good choices. Safeguard's a good choice, but actually that dewormer needs to be given at double the dose, the labeled dose, to get those inhibited stages. So that's one thing to think about there. Now you'll notice the avermectins like ivermectin, cydectin, eprinomectin, they're labeled for inhibited stages of Osteotagia, but some recent studies have shown that they just don't have the effect that they used to. These parasites are getting a little bit resistant to it. So that's why I like to use those white wormers, and use that especially in the fall time in Kansas, or the early summer in the South, because that'll get those inhibited stages knocked out. Now, the newest thing for deworming cattle is to use combination dewormers, where you give two different classes of dewormers at the same time. So you'd give an oral drench with, let's just say, Synanthic, and then you'd give a pour-on of Cydectin or injectable Cydectin at the same time. And that's a very effective combination. Gets a whole range of parasites and ectoparasites as well, lice and flies and everything. Are fecal samples helpful this time of year? Good question, Shannon. So fecal samples give us some information in cattle. They're not used like they are in horses, so we don't diagnose individual cattle as high shedders, low shedders, etc., and deworm accordingly. What we use fecal samples for is to monitor for parasite load, and then to measure how effective our deworming is. And so it's been shown that it's much more accurate to actually monitor fecals in calves, because that's more accurate representation of your parasite load in your pasture area than cows. So you would get that you get that fecal sample, send it in, and it would tell you a fecal egg count, and it would give you some species that you need to focus on deworming. Now, the fecal egg count reduction test would tell us how effective your dewormers are. You would get a sample from a calf, you would deworm that animal, and then 2 weeks later, you'd come back and you get the sample from the same calf. And then you would see and you would compare, and you want at least a 95% reduction in those egg counts to have an effective deworming. Good question. Okay, a lot of information on parasites, probably more than you wanted. If you have any questions, that you can sure put those in the box. But we're going to want to use an oral wormer in the fall, and I'm talking about Kansas here, oral wormer in the fall. Next spring, I do like the avermectins, like a pour-on or an injectable, just because it does get those ectoparasites as well. Okay, I think we had a question pop up, maybe. Acorn poisoning around northeast Kansas. Maybe more of a comment than a question. Acorns can cause some issues. They have to eat quite a few of them, though, to really be much of an effect. So more of an issue in horses tend to be. Okay. One thing that's worth mentioning, I made a note for myself and I almost forgot, so I'm glad I did. The importance of low stress handling when we're processing cattle. Um, there's a lot of training available on the internet, and I would recommend that everybody take advantage of that. It's free. It's available at bqa.org. And anything we can do to minimize stress in these animals is good. One, for animal husbandry, and two, it's going to actually improve their response to the vaccines. So it's going to be good for you, good for them. So there's a lot. It's beyond our discussion today, but we don't need to be hollering at the animals. We don't need to be hitting them. We don't need to be shocking them. Okay. Use the point of balance, use pressure zones to move the animals. And really importantly, you need to think about your facility design and the quality of that, because that plays a big role in how these animals move. So I encourage you to get on BQA and take that course, just so you can have some considerations to think about when you're designing your facilities, or handling cattle. Okay. I think that covers our fall processing. If anybody has any questions, they didn't get to comment, put them in. I try to go through the comments after these live sessions and answer them as best I can. Again, I will put that vaccination protocol into the comments later, so come back and refer to it if you'd like to. Okay, so fall calving. I'm sure many people are in the thick of it, well into it. A lot of people, maybe even some people are done, and that's okay. But this discussion, we'll talk about supplies to have on hand, and then we'll touch on maybe some calf health at time of birth, things to think about there. Okay, so supplies, those would be necessary in case you need to help that cow deliver the calf. Okay, now if you're not comfortable with it, it's never a bad idea to call your veterinarian. I'll just throw that disclaimer in there. We want to help. Even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, that's what we're here for. So please call your veterinarian if you need help. A couple things to have on hand if you do feel comfortable with it, or if you have an experienced mentor that can help you and help teach you, then you can have some of these supplies on hand. Sleeves to protect yourself and minimize contamination. Some lubrication. OB lube works really well because it's nice and thick, so it coats your gloves really well. OB chains, because those calves' legs are extremely slippery and almost impossible to grip to pull out. So those OB chains hook on that leg, and hold. One thing worth mentioning, when you're putting OB chains on, make sure you put 2 loops over the leg. Okay, it will prevent a broken leg if you put enough pressure on it. Okay, OB handles, because again, it honestly kind of hurts to hold those chains and pull like that. So just put some handles on there so you can grip those handles and pull with it. Now, not everybody needs one, but if you do, a calf puller is an excellent tool. I personally use it for 95% of my calving assistance because it's easier on my back. I don't need to pull by hand, and I do feel like it gives me better control too. So it can be a dangerous tool if used incorrectly, but it can also be a valuable help when you need it. Okay. And then a stainless steel bucket, chlorhexidine disinfectant. Make sure you minimize contamination because we can carry a lot of bacteria into that uterus when we're helping. We want to make sure we don't introduce bacteria that cause uterine infection. Is there a calf puller brand you recommend? Yeah, good question, Patrick. I personally like the new Calf Ease dual action puller. You can find it on our website, valleyvet.com. The reason I like this puller is because it's got 2 pulling points so that you hook it up to the legs of the calf and it pulls one out at a time. Okay. And that helps to deliver those shoulders and walk those shoulders out so they're less likely to get stuck. The other reason I like this, and compared to the ratchet pull is that it's easier to release the tension. So worst case scenario, if you get a bad hip lock, you just pull a little knob and push the lever down. It releases that tension so you can get that hip lock taken care of. Okay, that ratchet pull, it can be difficult to release the tension. Now, the other calf pullers that we carry, the Dr. Franks, the original Dr. Franks, that's a great puller. The ratchet pull, it is an excellent puller. I've used it very extensively myself too. And then the cable puller. So they're all good brands. It depends on your personal preferences. But that Calf Ease is my pick, my choice. Good question. Okay. Things to have on hand for when the calf comes, right at birth time. We want to disinfect that navel. So iodine spray or Vetericyn navel spray, good to have on hand. I like to tie off the umbilical cord stump. Okay. And so I'll use bronamide suture for that. And, tie it off maybe an inch or two below that haired part of the navel. Tie it off and then cut it, the leftover stump right below where you're tying it off. Okay. And then spray the disinfectant onto that to disinfect the stump. What that tying off does is it prevents bacteria from being able to travel up the umbilical cord and cause a navel infection. Okay. Importantly, though, unless you're able to do it within 6 to 12 hours of birth, you don't want to tie it off. You can seal those. If they're already bacterial contamination, you'll seal that bacteria in and almost guarantee an abscess. So make sure you get it done within 6 to 12 hours. If you don't, you've missed your window of opportunity, and that's okay. You can still disinfect it, and more than likely you won't have any issues. Okay. A calf resuscitator kit. It's a good thing to have on hand. If you get a calf out that's not wanting to breathe, really that would be your only way to try to stimulate those lungs and get that calf breathing. So if you need it now. If you don't need it, great. That's awesome. Okay. Some things to think about for calf health. Vitamin EAD is a valuable thing to give these baby calves at birth. A lot of times, depending on the calving season, cows are a little bit deficient in vitamin A and vitamin E. And then the other thing is, if the calf doesn't get all of the colostrum it needs, then it won't have the levels of vitamin A that it needs. And vitamin A is important for immune health, and it's important for eyes. It's important for weight gain. So I like to hit, most every calf with vitamin EAD close around birth time. If you struggle with scours, you can give something for scour prevention. Calf Guard is a rotacorona vaccine that you give as close to birth as possible. And First Defense comes in a couple different forms. It comes in a bolus and it comes in a paste. And that provides immediate passive immunity against E. coli and rotavirus and coronavirus with the Tri-Shield. The Dual Shield doesn't do the I'm going to probably say the wrong one, but it doesn't do either the rotavirus or coronavirus. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it doesn't do. So those are a few good products. You can even do the Calf Guard and the First Defense at the same time if you really struggle with it. And then I put plus or minus intranasal. If this is going to be the only time you handle the calf until around weaning time, it would be a good opportunity to give that calf some protection against respiratory disease. I prefer to wait until 6 to 8 weeks of age to vaccinate the calves. But like I said, if it's the only time you're going to handle it, then it's a good opportunity to give that. Okay. Nobody wants to have problems, but inevitably you will. It's just a part of having livestock. So some things to have on hand in case you run into problems. Colostrum replacers would be top of the list. And that's in case this calf does not get colostrum or doesn't get an adequate amount of colostrum. So again, it's important to get this colostrum into these calves as early as possible. They really need it within 6 hours of birth. Maybe 12, they'll still be able to absorb some. Once you get past 18 to 24 hours of age, they're not going to get any benefit from the colostrum. They'll get some energy from it, but they're not going to get the passive immunity they need. So we need to get that high quality colostrum replacer into that calf, ideally 6 to 12 hours of age. Okay. Or before, right away is okay too. A calf feeder, if you do need to give a calf colostrum, many times they don't want to suck. And unfortunately you have to tube them. But it is important to get that into them. So we do need to tube feed them. Now, if you're tube feeding, you want to be careful because you don't want to put that fluid, that liquid into the lungs. Okay. So it might be best to either have your veterinarian show you or to have somebody who knows what they're due show you. Let me take a pause here. Barb asks, is multimin as good or better than vitamin A/D at birth? That's a good question, Barb. Multimin is another excellent choice for at birth. They actually complement each other very well. Multimin doesn't have any vitamins in it. So it doesn't have vitamin A, doesn't have vitamin D, doesn't have vitamin E in it. It has four trace minerals: copper, selenium, zinc. And so they do complement each other very well. You can give both at birth. Good question. Treating a hernia in a calf. That's a good question, Barbara. That's one I'm going to defer to your veterinarian. I'm not really going to talk about that on this platform. That's something you need to have your veterinarian examine and diagnose and come up with a treatment plan for you. Okay. So the calf feeder, you want to make sure that you direct the tube towards the left side of the calf's throat. So I will introduce it actually from, I don't know how it's going to show up on screen, but from my right side, I'll introduce it at the right side of the calf's nose and push it back towards the left of the back of the throat, if that makes sense. Because the esophagus, this is my left side, the esophagus runs down the left side of the neck. And so if we can be over on the left side, it's more likely that calf is going to swallow that tube and we're going to get to the esophagus and not into the trachea, which runs right in the middle down to the lungs. Okay. Hope that makes sense. Okay. And so a couple other things. If your calf has scours, you're going to want electrolytes on hand. And that's to keep the calf hydrated, because the deadly part for the calf for scours usually is dehydration. And in the springtime, not this time of year necessarily, but hypothermia. So supporting that hydration level and the body heat of that calf is important. For infectious scours, if it'll respond, I like sustained boluses. You get 3 days of sustained activity with that sulfa antibiotic. So those are good to have on hand as well. Calf claim, I put this on the list. Calf claim or orphan no more. If your cow doesn't want to claim these calves, that can be a frustrating thing to deal with. So those do help try to get that cow licking on the back of the calf so that she will claim them. Now, I've heard that distiller's grains works very well for that too. So if you're having trouble, put that one in your back pocket, sprinkle the distiller's grains on the back of the calf, and cows tend to really like that. Okay. Now I threw this one on the list too, some CMPK. And we all don't often think about the cow, but the cow could run into some milk fever where she's low in calcium, or even prior to calving, I've seen a lot of downer cows due to phosphorus deficiency. So whenever you have a down cow, it's probably a good idea to give her some oral CMPK, whether that's in a bolus or a solution. And then it might even be wise, it would be wise to call your veterinarian out and see if you need to IV any of that solution as well. Okay, but that's a good thing to have on hand for your cows. I think I saw a question here above. Is loose mineral better than an injectable? Let me pop that one up so everybody can see it. Okay, so Bo asks, is a loose mineral better than an injectable? So that's kind of a loaded question. It depends who you ask. Your feed rep will say, yes, it's much better to get that mineral in through the natural way it was supposed to get in there, your multi-min rep will tell you that no, an injectable is the way to go. So I think they both complement each other well. An injectable trace mineral, and the only one that I'm aware of right now is multi-min. That only has 4 trace minerals. Now, there's a whole list of trace minerals that your cattle need for their bodily functions. Okay, those 4 are very important, but there's more. So it's essential to have a loose mineral or a mineral program available at all times for these cattle. Okay, now the injectable multi-min specifically is important for response to vaccines. It's important for breed back. It helps support a lot of these important functions that really affect our day-to-day economics. So I like them both. One doesn't replace the other, though. Okay, we're on the topic of baby calves, so I'm going to jump back to a vaccination protocol. I alluded earlier to it, but I like to wait until 6 to 8 weeks of age to vaccinate these babies. They respond better, and it gives them some time to mature and grow up, and not so hard on them, not so stressful. So modified live vaccine, and I put intranasal or injectable. At this age, I kind of like the intranasals. It's one less poke for these calves. And with the injectable vaccines, we can run into some issues where they don't respond to it because they have that passive immunity from maternal antibody. Okay. There are some products that get around that. Speak with your veterinarian, see what he or she recommends. But you could use either an injectable or you could go with an intranasal vaccine, and then you wouldn't have any considerations for that maternal antibody interference. Okay. You'd want to use a Pastorella vaccine as well, and then you'd want to use a black leg, a 7 or 8 way black leg. This would be an ideal time to implant these baby calves too. Over 45 days of age, we do have some implants labeled for that age group and class. So you could get an implant in them and get that extra growth. Wouldn't really be a necessary time for deworming because these baby calves, they wouldn't have much or any exposure at this time of year to parasites. So it wouldn't really be appropriate to do that unless you're trying to treat some ectoparasites. Well, I think that's everything that I had. If you guys, like I said, if you have any questions, please write them down. I'll come back later this afternoon and go through them. And I will try to figure out how we can upload these documents so you can come back to refer to these lists. I sure appreciate you logging on. Hopefully you got something out of the discussion today. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Tony. We appreciate it. We have a winner for
Yes.
you all. Meg.
For a gift card. Hold on. Oh gosh. The winner for today is Randy Sangantinso. Maybe.
Sorry, Randy, if we mispronounced that.
I'm so sorry.
But you win. All right. A couple of announcements before we leave you. Melanie?
All right. If you haven't entered yet, get entered for the gift card giveaway that we have going on right now. It ends September 23rd. So get entered now so you don't forget.
Also, be sure to get signed up for emails and check out our Facebook page so that you don't miss any of our upcoming live events. So with that,
All right.
we'll see you all later.
See ya.